Hello, and welcome to well, this is actually going to be a different sort of video. We're going to review for the exam in this video. Um, for all my classes, whenever I give an exam, usually the week before, I'll have a quiz or exam in hand and say, "Hey, if I were you, here's what I would know. Here's what I would study." Okay, and it lets you know A, what's going to be on the exam, B, gives you an opportunity to study that material or focus on that material, and ask me any questions you may have um, about that material if you're not understanding it or whatnot. Okay, so before we jump into that, um, I want to let you know that I changed the policies in the quizzes 1 through 4. You should now be able to go back in and see not only what your score was, but you should also be able to see the questions that you missed and what the correct answer was. Okay, so the first thing, or before we even go there, this exam is only worth 20 questions, or it's 20 questions. The questions are multiple choice. Multiple choice. You will have to calculate some things, but it's stuff that we've already worked on, okay? The exam does have to be completed in one sitting. It is timed. However, I gave you 180 minutes. That's 3 hours to do 20 questions. More than fair. I think you guys should be all right, okay? The questions that come up are algorithmic, so you may have different numbers than what a friend has, okay? So let's go ahead and go through some of the material that if I were you, I'd kind of focus on. First is the difference between prime and conversion cost. Okay, you should know what prime costs are. You should know what conversion costs are. You should know what costs you have to add up to get the prime cost. For example, remember, prime cost, we said, are our direct labor and our direct material. So if a question said, hey, what are your prime costs? And they, give you direct material, direct labor, MOH, you should be able to pull out what you need, say, oh, my prime costs are this, okay? Same thing with conversion costs. Remember, from our lecture, we said conversion costs are the direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. Total manufacturing overhead, okay? Remember, we can break out manufacturing overhead into the fixed portion and the variable portion, okay? There may be some sort of question that breaks down manufacturing overhead into fixed and variable. If that happens, we have to remember that we're talking about total manufacturing overhead, and we have to calculate out the variable portion and the fixed portion. Okay, fixed portion will be given to us. The variable portion will be, a rate per unit, and then the number of units. Okay, so I would know those two. Okay, let's see here. And I'm literally going through the test as we speak, and just letting you know what material the material you'd want to know. So remember, in this is chapter 1 material. I apologize. I should have said that from the get-go. So chapter 1 material, that's the prime and conversion. Okay. Remember, in chapter 1, we talked about unit product cost, right? And we said we had our direct material plus our direct labor plus our MOH, or manufacturing overhead. And again, that's total manufacturing overhead. We were able to calculate what the total manufacturing cost is. right? You should know how to calculate total manufacturing costs, okay? Let me give you a quick example, okay? What if they said that, oh, direct material is $2, direct labor is $1.50, manufacturing overhead is 75 cents, and remember this is the variable MOH, and they say that fixed manufacturing overhead is $2,000. And they tell us, oh, by the way, we produce 500 units. Okay, well, from here we need to say, okay, well, what's our total direct material? Total direct material is going to be the $2 times the 500 units that we produce. And if my math's right, that gives me $1,000. Okay, we got to do the same thing for the direct labor. Okay, well, the direct labor we know is $1.50 per unit times 500 times 500 units. Oh, shit, sorry. Times 500 units. So then all we got to do is just multiply out our $1.50 times our 500 gives us $750. So that means we have a total cost of direct labor of $750. Okay. The manufacturing overhead. Well, remember, this is broken into two things. So we have the variable MOH, which equals the 75 cents times the 500 units. And if we run that through the calculator, we get $375. Then we need to add the fixed MOH, which it's fixed. It's the same regardless of if we produce 0 units or 500 units, it's still $2,000. So we add all 4 of these up to end up with our total manufacturing cost, which should be $4,125. Oh, sorry, 4,125. Okay, so if you're okay and you completely understand how to take those costs and then figure out, hey, here's our total manufacturing overhead cost, you're good. If the question asked you, hey, what's your total direct material cost? You know how to do that. Hey, what's the total direct labor cost? Well, you know how to do that. You take the per unit times the units. Okay. If they ask for total, or if they ask for the total amount of manufacturing overhead, remember, you need the variable portion and the fixed portion. Okay. Now keep in mind, they're going to throw in some other things that you need to know, but it might not be part of the question. They might give you all the information, meaning they might give you all of our product costs and the period costs. So they're going to give us selling and administrative costs. They're going to give us fixed selling, variable selling, fixed administrative, variable administrative. Okay? So being able to, again, the takeaway here, sorry for the stuttering, the takeaway here is being able to recognize that first they want the total manufacturing cost that has to be DM, DL, and all of MOH. Okay? Still in chapter 1. Let's see here. What else do you need to know? Okay, so in chapter 1, we talked about that contribution formatted income statement, right? And we said this thing's bad, right? Because it segregates, right? It segregates based on fixed and variable, okay? So if you have a question that asks, hey, what is the per unit variable cost of a product that we sell, okay? So now, when you see that per unit, or a question that may ask per unit variable cost, okay, you have to recognize now we're getting away from product and period costs. Now we're looking at variable cost. Now we're looking at fixed cost, and we're segregating, okay? So if they ask for the per unit variable cost of a unit, remember this, here's what this includes. Direct material, because it's variable, plus direct labor, because it's variable. Only the variable portion of manufacturing overhead, okay, not the fixed. Because remember, contribution margin, contribution formatted income statement's bad. It segregates, okay? So we're only going to include the fixed, or I'm sorry, we're only going to include the variable MOH as part of our variable cost, okay? Then we also need to include any variable selling cost. And we also need to include any variable administrative cost, okay? And again, this is because they're asking for the variable cost per unit, so we got to think of that contribution formatted income statement, all the variable costs. I don't care if it's product or period. We're changing our classification here, and we're only going based off of traceability, right? Because we can directly trace it to a specific unit or specific unit of a product. So that's why they're all going to be variable, okay, or behavior. They behave in a variable fashion, okay. Let's see, what else do we got for? That's actually it for chapter 1, okay, as far as the material goes. Now, before we move on, I just want to mention one thing. This whole behavior, how costs behave, variable or fixed, and the contribution formatted income statement, we're going to get into more detail in chapter 5, which is coming up this week as well, okay? So let's jump to chapter 2, okay? What are some questions that we can ask? And I tell you what, I'm going to erase this. If you want to write it down, I'd maybe pause the video right now, jot down what I wrote down, and then come back to it, okay? So now we're going to look at chapter 2. So chapter 2, remember that was job costing, okay? You are going to have to calculate the predetermined overhead rate. POHR, predetermined overhead rate. Remember, remember how we calculated that? We said in the lecture videos, and you had a lot of practice in the quizzes as well as in the pre-built problems, right? Total estimated MOH divided by some total estimated driver, right? And it could be direct labor hours, it could be machine hours, whatever, okay? Now, there's another thing I have to point out again. It's going to be beating a dead horse, but that's okay. Notice what we have here. Total MOH. Total. What does that mean? Well, that means we have to include the variable portion and the fixed portion. They may try and trip you up and say, hey, fixed MOH is, I don't know, $20,000. $20,000, okay? The estimate, or I'm sorry, I apologize. The estimated fixed, or the estimated total fixed MOH is $20,000, okay? They may say that, hey, estimated machine hours or labor hours, whatever, estimated machine hours are 5,000. Okay, and then they may say, oh, by the way, estimated variable MOH is $3.50 per machine hour. Okay, if you do 20,000 divided by 5,000 to get your predetermined overhead rate, you will be wrong. Why? Because you didn't use the total manufacturing overhead. You only used the fixed portion. So how do we solve that? Very easy. You take 20,000 plus, we say the variable portion of $3.50 per unit times the 5,000 estimated machine hours. Okay, so now, based on that information, your total manufacturing overhead is $3.50 times 5,000, which is $17.5, plus your 20,000, which is $37.5. So 37,500 divided by the estimated total machine hours of 5,000 will give you your correct predetermined overhead rate. Okay? So I just wanted to point that out to make sure we're all on the same page there. Okay, let's see what else we got. Okay, so we will have to calculate departmental predetermined overhead rates, and I know we worked on an example of that in our study guide, and I know there were some questions on that in the pre-built problem. So departmental predetermined overhead rate. Okay, so you need to know that. Let's see what else. You should be able to apply costs. Okay, and we worked on that in the study guide as well, right? We said, hey, we have a predetermined overhead rate. We have, which was usually given to us in that stage of the problem, right? We need to apply. So remember, once you remember how to apply the predetermined overhead rate. Okay, you just take the predetermined overhead rate and you multiply it by the actual driver incurred. What do you mean by that? Well, if our driver is, let's say, labor hours, right? Okay, well, the predetermined overhead rate may have been, I don't know, I'm just thinking of trying to think of a number here. 22, okay? $22 was a predetermined overhead rate. The actual direct labor hours that were incurred on the job were maybe 100. So we multiply the predetermined overhead rate, 22, by those actual job hours, okay? So again, you got to know how to apply the predetermined overhead rate, okay? By the way, real quick, there's only 5 questions per chapter. So that's how we got a total of 20 questions. Okay, there's another question, applying predetermined overhead rate, but you have to figure out what is the total cost of a job, right? So we know how to do that. We did that in the study guide, worked through a problem on that, and there was some pre-built problems. Take your direct material that was used in the job, the direct labor that was used on the job, and the predetermined overhead rate that was applied to that job. That gives you the total cost of the job. So I'll say here, total job cost. Okay. Let's see. And the last question dealing with Chapter 2 material. Yep, same thing. Calculating the total cost and then of the total manufacturing cost and then determining the sales price. They're saying, hey, we're going to mark it up based on, I don't know, 10% of the total manufacturing cost. What should the selling price be? So I'm going to say markup. And I know we had an example of that as well. So that's Chapter 2 material. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 3. Okay, now before I erase, I'm going to erase this. If I were you, if you didn't take any notes, I'd pause the video now, jot down these topics. Okay, I mean, it's recorded. You can do whatever you want, but I'm going to erase this. Okay, so now we're going to look at Chapter 3. So Chapter 3 dealt with job order costing, but we looked at cost flows. Okay, there are some questions with cost flows. However, I didn't put any journal entry questions in. They show you T accounts, and we did some examples with the T accounts in the study guide. So you can look through those for a review. But basically here, all they're asking questions on how things flow. So as long as you know the cost flow, you're good. Okay, you don't have to do any journal entries, but you're going to have to know cost flows, right? Raw materials flows into WIP. Direct labor flows into WIP, right? All the indirects flow where? Into that manufacturing overhead account. They flow out of manufacturing overhead into WIP once we apply them, okay? You will have to be able to determine if there's underapplied or overapplied, okay? If you look at the T account and you see if there's a balance on the left side of the T account or the right side of the T account, you should be able to tell, or you should be able to recognize, oh, I underapplied or I overapplied, okay? So that's one question. Let's see. So you're going to have two questions actually on underapplied or overapplied. Okay. There is a question dealing with cost of goods manufactured, the statement. If you know the flow of the statement, you're good. You're in business. Let me think here. Cost. Cost of goods manufactured. Okay, if you know how to calculate the cost of goods manufactured, you're good to go. So there is a question that will ask you what's the cost of goods manufactured maybe for a month. They'll give you some information. They'll give you all the relevant information you need. Okay. Pertaining to the cost of goods manufactured, they're going to ask, hey, what's the cost of direct materials for May that was used in production, right? So you have to remember how to determine those direct material costs. Remember, we take the beginning of raw materials plus raw materials purchased minus the ending raw materials minus the indirect materials. Whatever that answer is, that's the direct materials cost that was used in production. Let's see what else here. You will also have to calculate the actual or they'll give you the actual manufacturing overhead cost incurred. They'll give you what was applied. You got to tell if it's underapplied or overapplied. And again, this question's not in T account form, okay? And then that's it for Chapter 3, okay? So if you know the cost flows, you can calculate you know how to calculate over or underapplied manufacturing overhead, you're good. You know the cost flows and you know how to do the statement of cost of goods manufactured, you're good. Okay. So finally, we have chapter 4, right? And chapter 4 was our process costing chapter, right? So for this one, you're going to have to calculate, the cost per equivalent unit based on maybe direct material, maybe based on conversion cost. So you have to calculate the cost of unit. Okay, that's one question, or one topic rather, I should say. You will have to calculate the cost to be accounted for. Okay. Which was, I believe, the 4th step that we covered in chapter 4. If you remember, we did, we went through all 4 steps of determining, hey, what's the equivalent unit? Okay, what's the cost of equivalent unit? What are the costs to be accounted for, meaning what transferred out? And then we said, okay, what's our cost in ending WIP? Let's see. So yeah, you got your cost to be accounted for. You have your let's see. So I'll just say cost transferred out and completed. Let's see here. There's another question on cost of equivalent unit. And the final question kind of runs through everything. What's the cost per equivalent unit? Calculating out the percent to completed, so calculating the number of units and whatnot. Okay, so that's pretty much the exam and all the material. Again, the exam's worth 50 points, but it's 20 multiple choice questions, and you got 3 hours to complete it. Now, we went over all the material, right? Kind of gave you a heads up. Here's what I would know if I were you. Here's something else I would study. You only get one shot at this, okay? You know what's on there. So if I were you, what I would do is I'd review that material, right? Go back, maybe work on a couple problems in Connect, right? Redo an assignment. Doesn't matter, your grades are there. I'm going to give you the highest grade anyways. So if you go in and just do one problem 20 times, I don't care, right? You already got the grade. That's helping you study for it, okay? If any of this stuff is confusing, okay, I'm going to put the onus on you guys. If any of this stuff is confusing and you're having problems, I want you to text me. I will set up a live chat, whatever, within Moodle, and I don't care how long we talk for. You ask me anything you want to ask me, I don't care. I just want to make sure that you understand the material. So if you're struggling, if there's any part that we covered that you're like, man, I was struggling with that, you know what? Get at me, text me, say, hey, I need to set up a time so we can talk, so I can ask you some questions and we can work on some problems together. That's perfect. That's not a problem. Okay? So good luck on your exam. Real quick, the exam's going to open Monday night. Actually, tonight's Sunday, so it'll open up Monday morning at 1 o'clock or 1 in the morning. You have 2 weeks to complete this, okay? 2 weeks. But again, once you start it, you gotta complete it. So keep that in mind as we go through and we start getting you start working on chapter 5, which starts this week. You have 2 weeks to complete this chapter. Okay, so if again you need anything, have any questions, please text me. All right, good luck, and hopefully I'll be talking to you soon.